What is going on, you guys? You good? You should be a little worn out because we're Pacific Northwest people, and yesterday was sunny and all of like 70 degrees, and it sucked all the energy out of everybody because that's what happens. It's like, I grew up in Arizona, right? 70 is called wintertime, and it was funny to see these little kids that were Pacific Northwest kids yesterday. I mean, they're just like, I'm gonna go play, But they're the same kids when it's 55 degrees. They're like, get the sprinkler out and let's play, So it is so fun to see the kids yesterday. Everybody did a great job at Duvall Days. To everybody that served, man, big round of applause for them. Super great. Pastor Scott, Pastor Trent, all their teams did a phenomenal job, and it was just great to see everybody down there having a good time, loving our city. We exist for the good of our city. That's really our mission statement as a church, and so that was really shown yesterday. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we can get underway with what God has for us today in His Word. Let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, I am grateful, so grateful for your goodness and your grace, and I am grateful for your presence, and I am grateful for the fact that your presence in our lives is potent and powerful if we press into what that really means. And I say that in light of even our passage this morning and seeing how you came to dwell among your people and how that has a direct ramification for our lives. I think in that, though, I also realize that many times we don't wire our lives in such a way to experience all that you offer us, right? We kind of come at it from an angle, or we maybe don't make quite the investment. And I pray that we will continue to grow to really have our lives organized around you so that we know what it's like to enjoy life in its fullness because you are at the center of life. And so I pray that you continue to work and guide and teach and move us to enjoy you and seek you more. We love you, Jesus, and we thank you in your good and perfect name. Amen. So today is the last day in our entire series on the book of Exodus, right? And it's been a great series. We spent now 20 Sundays going through the second piece of literature in your Bible. And I want to remind you what the big theme of Exodus was, right? It was all about God invading the space of his people in their brokenness, in their slavery, in their sense of aimlessness, and he grabs a hold of them and he rescues them from their bondage, and more than just getting them out into freedom, he moves them from bondage to freedom, to the deepest freedom of all, which is realizing his presence. And that's the ultimate goal. God isn't just simply in the business of saying, I want to alleviate your burden so you can do your own thing. God goes further and says, I want to alleviate your burden so that you can know me, and from that you can have this robust, abundant, full life. And that's what God is doing. That's how he's on mission in this particular book. He wants to dwell with his people. That's the ultimate goal. Now, as we saw throughout our study, that was a long journey. Right? That process of rescue and restoration also had within there a lot of trial, a lot of error, and a lot of sin. Right? The people would do their own thing, kind of create the rules as they went, but finally, they saw a glimpse of life without God. Right? Through all of this stuff, they had been seeing and feeling and experiencing the presence of God in a very limited way. But then suddenly they were confronted with the idea that God says, you know what, I'm going to let you go to your land. It's going to be completely secure. It's going to be prosperous, but I'm not going to show up. And it was with that vision that God may not be present with them that they were like, whoa, wait, game over then. Because if you're not going to be with us, we don't want to go. We want your presence. It's a great and a mournful thing to contemplate life without God. It is awful. We don't want that. We want you with us. And so they finally realize what this is all about, and they long for God to be a part of their lives. So much so that they begin to orient their whole life around what it means to have his presence available to them. That's where we find ourselves today in the book of Exodus. So if you have a Bible or you want to use our app with our notes, we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 35 to Exodus chapter 40. So we're going to be clearing out that entire section and ending our study today in this, again, second piece of literature in your Bible. Now, to give you some background on what this is all about, we want to remember who God is. all right? God is other, and God is holy, and God is altogether pure, right? And the people, they're not. Like we said, they're broken, they're incomplete, they're selfish, they're self-seeking. It's something we all as human beings will struggle with, and so we are completely different from God. God is wholly other from us. Therefore, if God is going to dwell among his people, there needs to be a filter that can kind of buffer the extreme difference. Because God has already said that no one can see him and live, right? It's the Indiana Jones scene. Everybody melts if they see God. Just blah, right? Just completely death to whoever looks at God. Even Moses, when he said, I'm going to see your glory, God's like, I can kind of show you the back of my glory. I'm going to put my hand over you and cover you so you can sort of see, but can't see it fully because you can't live through seeing how pure I am. Therefore, if God is going to dwell with his people, there has to be, like I said, a filter. This apparatus that allows for presence, but also protection. Not protecting God, but protecting the people because God is so glorious. And that apparatus is what we call and what the Bible calls the tabernacle. Now we have a picture of the tabernacle right here. This gives you an idea of what this is that they are instructed to build. So it's rather large. It's about half the size of a football field, so that gives you some kind of structural ideas. That center tent is a series of like overlapping fabrics, right? It's layer upon layer upon layer, very costly, very ornate, all sorts of beautiful images and descriptors and kind of things that capture the essence of God's holiness and goodness. And then there's these different artifacts that go inside to represent different elements of their worship and connection to God. All of that is there in the tabernacle. And at the core of the tabernacle, it's a place of worship. It's a place of ritual. In that ritual, it's a place of forgiveness, but chiefly it's a place of God's presence. So if you remember, God has been on the mountain and they've been down sort of in the valley and they see God there. Or Moses goes out of the camp and he goes to the tent of meeting, which is different. And God shows up at the tent and everybody in the camp looks at Moses outside and they see the glory of God there. But now God's going to move into the camp when they build this thing, right? So you got to understand, now presence is getting even closer to the people. And they finally want that presence. They long for that presence. They fear losing that presence. So, in the book of Exodus then, chapter 25 to 31 was instructions for the tabernacle, right? And that was just all these details and all this stuff. You do this with the rings and the poles and the curtains and gold this and silver that. And it was just this very exhaustive list. That was those chapters. Here, 35 to 40 is the implementation of those instructions. They're finally getting down to business and doing it. Now, in between that was what? That weird little pagan church festival they had with the golden bovine, right? Where they all thought they were too cool for school and they were going to make their own little god to be like God. And God's like, you're all morons. And he kind of clears some house and gets them back on track. And so now, being on track, they're ready to proceed. They're ready to get down to business. They're going straight because they want life with God, right? So again, like I said, there's a lot of specs and a lot of details to this whole tabernacle, right? It's like God is like Steve Jobs. Like I'm in it. I'm going to get down to every little brass tack, every little square detail, right? And sometimes, even for myself, when I read the book of Exodus, when I get to that whole laundry list of supplies and everything else, I'll be like, oh. I just kind of blaze through it as fast as I can because it's all this stuff. And sometimes when we do that, we go, okay, I can just move through 5 chapters and not really pay attention. We miss some cool stuff because there's some really cool stuff amidst all of these details, things that I think are very powerful and very applicable for our lives. And we're going to look at some of those. And so the first thing I want us to look at, right, and if you're taking notes, this is your first note, and it's important for all of us. It's this reality that God cares about our why, not simply our what. God cares about our why, our motive, not simply what we do and what we accomplish, right? It goes a little bit deeper. So, Exodus chapter 34, verses 4 and 5. It says, Moses said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, "This is the thing that the Lord has commanded. Take from among you a contribution to the Lord, whatever is of a generous heart, and let him bring it with the Lord's contribution, or bring it as the Lord's contribution." So the contribution here is the resources to build the tabernacle, right? So everybody's going to be gathered around. They're going to be bringing in their cash or whatever they have to contribute to this task. Now, always a question that I have had since I was a kid was, why does God ask them to make the investment? Like, why does he ask them to build anything? Because I'm thinking, if God is God and he could build the entire universe, couldn't he build something cooler than we could? Right? Like, hey, I want you guys to invest in this. I'd be like, but wait, couldn't you build like a cloud city with holograms and like cool stuff? You want us to put together just simply a tent when you could do so much more? Why would you do that? See, as I've pondered that, I think I understand God's heart. He's looking for a heart in us, right? So he wants to see how much we want him. That's what he wants to see. He wants us to show how deeply committed we are to his mission and his cause and his desires. In fact, he wants us to own the reality that everything we have, he's given to us, and therefore we give back to him joyfully and gratefully because he provides all things for us. Like, God puts this on them just to see how willing they really are to sacrifice, if you will, for the sake of his presence. It's one thing to say, man, I want God's presence, and God's like, great, here's the things you do to experience my presence, and we're like, oh, dude, that's too much, man, I sleep in. Oh, that's too much because that actually asks for a couple of bucks. Oh, that's too much. That asks for a little bit of my time. That's too much because that asks me to say no to things that I like. Like if we say we really want the presence of God, but then we're not willing to go all in on whatever it takes to experience his presence, we should never be shocked that we haven't ever maybe sensed him in our life like we could. And so God puts this thing on them and says, all right, bring your contribution with the right heart. Now, what's kind of cool about this is the fact that if you remember the background, as they left Egypt, right, all the Egyptians were so eager for them to get out of town that they're like, hey, man, just take gold, take silver, take our stuff, just go with our wealth even. We just want you to clear out as fast as possible because you are a bad omen on us. And so the people were slaves that became rich at the hand of their captors just trying to drive them out of town. And so they were all pretty well off. And so in that, they know that God has provided for them. And so God is just asking for a little bit in return of what he has fully provided to their lives. But again, notice what he wants. He doesn't just want their stuff. He wants a heart that is generous. Here's what I want to remind us of. God is not in the business of asking of us for our duty. God doesn't want our duty. He'll take it, but that's not what he's in the business of looking for. See, God is looking for our delight in him, not our duty. He wants action and affection. Because if it's just action without affection, it becomes ritual. And so he's not looking for any of that. I know sometimes we think in the Old Testament God was all ritual and he's all stone cold and no fun and kind of like that angry uncle that you have. And, that's not God. God's like, no, man, I want you to enjoy. I want you to delight. I want you to seek me. I want you to be earnest and eager and wanting and have this heart that is generous. And that's a big deal. I mean, I think about it like tomorrow is my beautiful wife's birthday, and she will be 29. All right, so, and so tomorrow, I said, honey, I'm taking you on a date for your birthday. She's like, wow, you must love me. You really want to celebrate me. And I'm like, no, I'm just afraid of you, so I'm taking you on a date. Because hell hath no fury than a woman on her birthday, and it is not remembered or cared for, right? So I'm going to take you on a date because I'm not stupid, And so if I said that, I would melt like the people in the Old Testament when they looked at God, right? She would just kill me with her vision. So, right, and so we get the idea that, none of us want somebody doing something for us simply out of duty. That does not say, I celebrate you, right? That just says, all right, I'll be responsible. I'll do the right thing. And so God isn't looking for just the right thing. He's looking for a heart in the right thing. In fact, even in Deuteronomy 28, God says, you know what? I will bless you if you obey me. And he tells the Israelites, and if you disobey me, I'm going to curse you. But then he qualifies what he means by obedience. He says, and by obedience I mean, Deuteronomy 28:47, he says, when you do this with a joy and gladness of heart, because I've given you the abundance for all things. Again, I don't want any of us to walk out of here and say, oh, okay, so I guess if my heart's not in it, I shouldn't obey. No, don't do that. That's bad. But what I'm saying is if your heart's not in it, you should obey and then say, Jesus, forgive me, my heart's not in it, and help my heart to be in it. That should always be our target. Joy and gladness of heart, a generosity of spirit, because God cares about our why. Not only that, another thing we see in this text is number 2 in your notes. We see that God cares about how we get things done, not just that we get things done. Right? There's a heart in it, but there's also a skill set that is within it as well. In fact, here in chapter 35, verse 10, it says, let every skillful craftsman among you come and make all that the Lord has commanded. So apparently God cares about quality control here, right? Right? So he wants to make sure that anybody that's a part of this process isn't just like, all right, let's get that old 60 shag carpet, that lame wood paneling, and get some guy that doesn't know the difference between a Phillips head and a flat head to put it up, right? He's not looking for just kind of second best or whatever else. And sometimes even in churches, that can be the case. It's like, okay, what's the cheapest way, most efficient way, and sometimes the junkiest way possible we can do things. But God's like, no, I don't want that. I want to make sure how you do it and why you do it is central. And it's not because God is like this bougie, weird diva God. Like, no, I just want high quality and really nice, and I'm all about myself. It's not it. See, here's what God knows in this equation. The quality of our work, right, is a reflection of how we see the one we do the work for. Right? So if we really esteem someone, then if we're doing something for them, we want to do it to the best of our ability. It's not going to be like, I really esteem you, so now you get my sloppy thirds. Because then it would not show the right reflection. And so God sets the bar really high. I want this well-skilled process with these very generous hearts. But what God knows is if we grab onto that, we feel the most rewarded for that. Like I know in my own life, if there's something I'm doing for somebody that I care about a lot, so I do my very best, I feel awesome when I give that thing to them. Versus if I was just half-baked, throwing it together quick, everything else, and then I kind of sheepishly give it. Like I'm already embarrassed before they've ever even seen it, right? Because it's like, I know it's not my best. I don't feel good about it. They may not feel as esteemed as they could have if I would have had a lot more planning. In fact, it reminds me of my friend Bruce Georgian. Bruce has 3 daughters, and he loves his girls immensely. And Bruce owns a construction company, and he is a very skilled woodworker. And so for his girls, he built them a 4,000 square foot cabin on Priest Lake. And he did this so that they would always come together as a family year after year. As the girls got older and had families of their own, they would all come back to this place. So he built this amazing cabin on the lake. It's gorgeous. And then inside the cabin, he handcrafted by himself every piece of furniture. Every single piece. Also, all the cabinets he did as well. But every chair, every couch, every cabinet, every table, every nightstand, everything. And he did it all where it was like all of these really intricate, like interweaving components, so all the joints were done a certain way where there was no screws and no nails. And I mean, it's amazing. It took him years to do this. And he had Ellen and I to the cabin for a weekend. And I was just looking, I was like kind of peeking behind and pulling out like, wow, those are really intricate joints. And I'm like, why did you do this? Even where they wouldn't see. He goes, because I wanted to capture how much my girls mean to me. I wanted them to know that even things they would never see, I cared about. So they knew that I cared about them. Right? It was just an incredible thing. And it's that same spirit here when it comes to what God is putting before them. And the more investment they make, the more attention to detail they have, the more it's going to be like, man, then I know that they love me, and they know that they love me, and they're hungry for my presence. They're not going to waste anything. So it's all centered on him, right? And so it's this very clear direction. He says, I want you to do it this way, with this heart, with this skill set, get underway. And what we see is that the people answer the challenge. They answer the challenge. That's the third thing in your notes, the passionate business of seeking God's presence. God says, here's the bar. And in verse 21, it says, and they came. They came. Everyone whose hearts stirred him, and everyone whose spirit moved him, and they brought the Lord's contribution to be used for the tent of meeting, and for all its service, and for the holy garments. Then you drop into verse 29. All the men and the women and the people of Israel whose hearts moved them to bring anything for the work that the Lord had commanded by Moses to be done, they brought it as a free will offering to God. So it wasn't have to. It wasn't required to. It wasn't, oh gosh, I suppose we should. It's demanded of us. No, it was we get to. We're longing to. We can't wait to. We want to, right? They desired to prove it, not just say it, but to prove that they wanted God and they wanted God's stuff. And it wasn't just that, but then there was also these skilled craftsmen that God had put into their minds the ability to do what was necessary to do. And again, it was everyone whose heart stirred within them, they came to do the work as well. So everybody is engaged in this with a passionate drive, right? So it is best supplies with the best skills. And you remember just a couple of chapters before, this was a group of people saying, oh, we're going to worship other gods and do other things. And God says, I'm not going to show up. And they're like, whoa, no, we want you to show up no matter what. And so we will give to God, we will work to God our absolute best. Now, what I love about this is it's a good reminder to us, right? That we want to have this passionate desire as we give to God or work to God. Even when we come together on Sunday morning, one of the things that's true of us as a church, not just on Sundays, but throughout the week and our regroups and other ministry extensions, or even what we do for the good of the city, like yesterday, we have intentionally engineered things as a church to be lay-driven. Lay is a word that you could say volunteer or servant, non-paid driven. Right? It's why even as a church, we don't have a secretary. We don't have any assistants to the pastors. We intentionally say, no, we're going to try to keep the staff as small as possible to include as many people as possible to use their skills and gifts and abilities for the good of the city and the good of Christ's kingdom in all that we do. And so that means then for us that we all want to come trying to do our very best, not sloppy seconds, not thirds, but saying, no, because I'm not doing this simply for Redemption Church. I'm not doing it simply for the good of the city. I'm chiefly doing it for the glory of God. I'm doing it because I love him. I'm doing it because it's worship. I'm doing it because it shows that I care about him above all else. And so that's why I bring my very best to the table, my best skills, my most attentive heart. And that's how we should come. We should never see ourselves as volunteers. Everything we do, especially in the name of Christ, is an act of worship. An act in which we do this, and in part we're saying, because I want more of your presence to be felt in my life. I want to enjoy you more. That's the heart, that's the desire, to give the very best. And so they do. And notice how it continues, how they brought this in. It says in verse 3 and 4 of chapter 36, they received from Moses all the contribution that the people had brought for doing the work of the sanctuary. So the skilled craftsmen begin to get the resources from the people and they begin to get underway. And yet it says, they still kept bringing him free will offerings every morning. Right? So the skilled craftsmen are underway and they're using the gold and silver and bronze and all the materials and everything else. And then, Moses like, okay, here's some stuff and here's some more stuff and here's some more stuff. And the people keep bringing more wealth to the table for the skilled workers to do their job. This was so that the craftsmen could do all the different tasks that the sanctuary required. And they just kept doing it. But what I love about this is it says they kept bringing it morning after morning. right? They just couldn't get enough of making sure the supply was met. And more than that, it says it was a free will offering. In other words, in the Old Testament, God had prescribed certain things. You bring this once a year, you bring that once a year, you bring this much crop, that much animal, whatever. So those were all prescribed. A free will offering was just like, hey, whatever you feel led to, this is what you get to do. Right? And so they were like, well, okay, well, then we're going to keep throwing stuff at it, right? It's like, take my money. That's what they were saying. Take my money. Take my skills. I mean, imagine parents, if your teenager was like this when it came to just like their bedroom. They're like, Mom and Dad, please let me clean my room. Let me clean my room so I can do my homework. Woohoo! Right? Like if they were in that spirit, you'd be like, wow, that's a great spirit. We like that. Right? They want to clean their room and do their homework, right? They can't wait. Then they're saying, after I'm done with my homework, I can hang out with my little brother. It'd be so great. I mean, that was the spirit that the Israelites had at this point. They're just all in on this, man. They're digging it, right? And so here's what Moses has to do. It says, Moses says to them, the people bring much, more than enough for doing the work that the Lord commanded us to do. So Moses gave command, and the word was proclaimed throughout the camp, let no man or woman do anything more for the contribution to the sanctuary. So the people were restrained from bringing. That is something very few modern pastors will ever have the opportunity to utter, right? Like, no more, got enough, you know? I mean, this shows their heart. I mean, they were bought in, they were all in. Moses is like, block the boxes. Don't let them give, don't pass the plate. We got enough. Why? Why were they like this? They were like this because they saw God. They saw God move, they saw God act, they had a perspective on God where they know that God was supplying all of their need and more, and therefore they wanted more of Him. And so they gave their supply and they gave their skills. But also there's something that comes up 20 times in these handful of chapters. It says they worked and they gave, but they also executed this, it says, just as the Lord commanded. 20 times it says that, right? And part of this is important because there's a lot of detail that goes into the tabernacle. And I understand this from a contracting perspective because I grew up in a home of contractors. So my father owned a construction company, my stepfather owned a concrete company, and I know how that process works, right? Where you want to do your best work, but also you're trying to minimize your costs, and then you're dealing with subcontractors, they're trying to minimize their cost, and sometimes with the subcontractors, they're cutting corners, they're not quite doing everything they said they would do, and you're having to stay on them. No, you said you do this, well, I know, but listen, we can't, there's this whole game that goes on, right? And so everybody's trying to minimize their cost to maximize their profits. Here, nobody's cutting any corners. So God said, I want you to do it just like this, just in this way, just in this order, with just these specs. And they're like, we're doing every single thing He says, and we keep obeying His commands. This is very different than the Israel we've seen up to this point. But this is a part of also desiring God's presence, desiring to obey. And so they invested passionately, they served skillfully, they obeyed radically, and what we see by the end of the book is that God shows up powerfully. Chapter 40, verse 34. They build the tabernacle, they invite God to come into space. And it says, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and a fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. And so again, God was on the mountain. God was outside of the tent, or outside of the camp rather, but now God comes to settle within the camp, right? So this is their first time that they're like, wow, we're checking out God in 360, man. This is totally different for us. And they're stoked about that reality. Not only that, it says that God stayed in sight throughout all of their journeys, right? So God was always amidst the camp for the rest of their time. Even when they did stupid stuff, God stayed among them in His presence. But it also says that Moses couldn't enter. The glory was so great. The guy that could go up onto the mountain to talk with God, could go into the tent of meeting and talk like one talks face to face with a friend, could not enter into the space. The question is, why? And the answer is because Moses was still a sinful guy. The answer is that no matter how close God could be to them, there was still going to be a barrier, right, that required sacrifice. In fact, it's no mystery to me that the book of Exodus ends with the tabernacle, God's presence, and then the next book is a book called Leviticus, which is all about all the sacrifice that is necessary to come closer to God's presence. Right? All the things that are required to deal with our sin. And what's interesting is throughout the Old Testament, there's all this stuff, all these animal sacrifices and rituals and all of this stuff, and none of that really abolished anybody's sin. It just acknowledged sin and sort of blanketed sin to a different time when God would send a greater sacrifice to eradicate sin in our lives. So there's still limits, there's still barriers, there's still the sense in which God is present, but he isn't fully experienced. In fact, that continued for a very long time until an upgrade took place. And the upgrade is the fourth point in your notes. It's God's upgrade from fabric to flesh. From fabric to flesh. So tabernacle was fabric. It was a tent. And God would show up in a limited sort of way. But then when we cross over into the New Testament, we see God shows up in a completely different way. In fact, John chapter 1, verse 14 says this, "And the Word, who is Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us." So God exits the fabric, he exits the temple concept, and instead comes to dwell among his people in a very direct, personal, intimate way. And not as this high-flying, mighty king that everybody can acknowledge on a white horse. He comes humble and lowly and serving and caring and carries our burdens and takes our afflictions. I mean, it's this completely radical, different thing where God's like, I'm going to come underneath you to lift you up, and that's how I'm going to be present. So he comes to dwell among us, and he comes in the full glory of the Father, right? And he's filled with grace and truth. Grace to forgive us, grace to stimulate us, grace to move us, and truth to give us abundant living. God's truth is never a killjoy. God's truth is to maximize joy. So Jesus comes to do all of that, to eradicate our sin and to dwell with us. From that, as he deals with our sin and comes to dwell with us, we see it goes a step further, actually, in the book of Ephesians. In Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 18, it says this. It says, "For through him we all, both being the Jews and Gentiles," that's his context here, "have access in one Spirit to the Father. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit." So not only does God come to dwell with us in the person of Christ, but through Christ and through the Spirit, he comes to dwell in us as individuals, but also as his church. Right? So that old tent back in that Old Testament is dispensed with. That temple in the Old Testament dispensed with. And instead we become the dwelling place. We're now the temple. We're this residence that God takes up so that we might sense his presence and his presence might be known in the world around us. And so he does it to show his glory. He does it to invite us into life with him. But he also does it because, again, we have a responsibility to then, just as with the tabernacle, there was this column of smoke and fire to show his presence in the world, we as his church are to live in such a way and do things in such a way that we now show his presence in the world. Matthew chapter 5. Jesus says, "You are now the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but instead they put it on a stand and it gives light to all who are in the house." He says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." See, the reason we want to do good, and true good, I don't mean like uphold the moral standard and apply it to everybody else who doesn't know Jesus good. I mean where we are embodying the good. And we are revealing the grace. And we are showing transformed lives. And we are displaying love and generosity and kindness. And we're real peacemakers in the world. When we actually are leaning over the plate and loving our enemies, even when they don't love us in return, or in fact might even treat us spitefully, when we keep doing the next right thing because we want the presence of glory in God to be shown through our lives, you know what? You're light. You display something that the world can see, and they might actually from that go, wow, you're breaking my stereotype. You're different than what I anticipated. I want to know more about this God in heaven. Maybe I'm going to give him some credit that I wouldn't have given before because I didn't see it until I saw it in you. See, that's true to every one of us as individuals, and that's true to us as a church. We as a church are like that tabernacle now. We as a church are that beacon of grace and truth. We reveal as a church the presence and the joy and the potency of God. In fact, this is why as a church, we always say that our emphasis is for the good of the city, right? That we exist, we want to first and foremost glorify God. In that, we want to display and reveal the grace of God. But we're doing that for the cause of the city, for the good of our city. And that's why we engineer, again, a lot of the things that we engineer, right? Because we want to be light. We want to show his presence, right? And to show his presence means we need to have a presence. And so we do that in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, we've done that through Duvall days, and we do that through being involved in the city, and we do that through being involved at the school with different things. I mean, there's so many different ways that we seek to reveal his presence. We try to do it as individuals, but we also seek to do it as kind of an organization that is the church, right? Because we want his presence to be felt, we want his presence to be seen. But if you're an outsider, right, that they're coming into contact with that is going to have different elements. And so one, of course, is when we are good friends and good neighbors and everything else, that's where they sense it. But also there's this reality that even though we as Christians acknowledge that we are now the house of God, his people, outsiders look and go, no, a building is the house of God, right? That's how they would understand it. So in a strange sort of way, we get that, no, we are the house, but we also understand that they kind of identify the house as being our house, and that also acts as a beacon of light. That is why even as a church, we've had this whole thing with the hub, right, in our building. And we've looked at this as being for our city. In fact, I think we have a slide that kind of captures that is what our whole thing is about. The reason we're doing the hub is that we want to make it a gift to our city. In the name of Jesus, we want God's glory to be seen in that place as we open our doors, as we're good neighbors and good fellow citizens. And we try to, again, disrupt the stereotypes by saying, hey, we're in it with you, we're in it for you. It's even when we do crazy things as a church. Some people I know do not agree with this, but we actually volunteer to pay our taxes as a church. And the reason for that is because some people go, man, churches, they don't ever contribute to the community. They're not in it with us. And we're like, yes, we are, and we choose to be in it with you. We choose to be in it with you because we want you to know we're really for the good of the city. So for us, in a lot of ways, the hub is interesting because it's an extension of our mission. And as we move forward, that's exactly how we see it. We're not trying to build a church building. We're trying to build an outpost that people can identify with being a community of believers, that hopefully in that they see God's goodness in our lives and in our expression and how we partner in our city. Now currently, this picture that's going to be next is our current facility. So we own that building. We have that building, and we have the 2 parcels of property next to it. So if you rode horses yesterday, you were riding on our property, right? So I can say, hey, we were riding horses on our property. Sound like cowboys now, all right? So, but that's ours. And right now we're in the middle of working with the city, and I can tell you, people are like, what's the updates? And the updates are, it's going to take a long time, right? Because it's just the way it works. The city's awesome. They're doing their job as best as they can, as expediently as they can. And so it's just going to take time. It's going to take months and months and months. You know, so if you're wanting updates every 6 weeks, we can't hardly give them every 6 months because it just takes a lot of time for the wheels to turn. But in the end, our goal is to see this. Right? And it's pretty cool. I dig it, actually. It's an awesome looking building, right? It's kind of, it's just got a hip look to it, and I really like it. And again, we want to do this well. Why? Because what we do reflects the one we do it for. This is why it's not going to be shag carpet, wood paneling. It's like we want it to reflect the one that we care about. Now, to get this done, right, we know that it takes resources. And we've been trying to wait for opportunities to share things and to move things forward. And again, like I said, things move really slow. And so we're like, man, we don't have any details to really give you, but what should we do? I mean, we're getting to this point where we have to start doing some things. We need to start setting some phases or goals to get things accomplished, right? And so from that, we said, really, we've got two phases then. We worked it through as leaders, and we said, phase one, we said, man, we want to just pay off everything in 2018. Let's just pay it off, right? And then as we go into 2019 and 2020, man, we want to save up for down payment. We want to worry about procuring lending. We want to break ground. We want to move to all of that because we have a timeline. We have a 3-year timeline that we have to be working within and everything else. And so we just kind of felt led at that point, like this is what we really need to strive for and what we need to do. So we're just going to make this year the year of getting out of debt. Now, I know some people are like, but getting out of debt ain't sexy. No debt is sexy. It's awesome. It's freeing. It's liberating. It gives us opportunity, right? Takes the shackles off. So then the question becomes, well, great, Matt. Getting out of debt, I'm all about that. Dig Dave Ramsey. Let's get that snowball going, right? So, like, what kind of debt are we trying to recover in 2018? Well, it's a big debt. $775,000. That we want to pay off in 7 months. Big, audacious, nutty goal. Some of you are like, $775,000? That's a lot of money. It is a lot of money. Now, we own the property next door free and clear. We've got a lot of money into the building, but this would be the difference, to clear out the hub building. That's what we would look to do. And so our goal, our desire, our heart as a church over the next 7 months is to tackle this. Right? And it was perfect ending with, as far as Exodus, like, man, they came with a certain heart. We want a certain heart. We want a certain desire in this. It's not just a task. It's a goal, but it's deeper than that. And so what we're going to do is, starting today, there's going to be a little tile on your app. It's going to say, for our city, right? And if you tap on that tile, it's going to give you a running total of what's going on, right? So we can go ahead and bring up that next slide there, right? So we're seeking to pay off the hub debt in 2018. It's going to say we're starting at 0, right? And then every time there's giving to the hub, to the good of the city project, you're going to see that slide, right? So as time goes on, let's say we get to $150,000, it's going to look like that on your tile, right? And so you're going to be like, you're going to see exactly how we're progressing over the next 7 months. Now, I admit, it would be awesome if I could have you open the tile and it would show that we already had $150,000 contributed to paying off the debt. But if you open the tile, you're not going to see $150,000 that's been contributed to the debt. Actually, you're going to see already we have $525,000. Don't you feel like it's a thing that can be tackled now? Yeah, now you're like, oh, whoa. We're snowballing, man, right? We're rolling now. I was looking at 775 and like, I'm going to find another church. But now, that just means we have to raise, go and bring up that next slide, $250,000 over the next 7 months. Can our church do that? Yeah, our church can do that. Yeah. We can do that. We can do that in our sleep. You know why? You people are radically generous. I mean, if there's anything I brag about, man, it's how generous this church is, how giving. I am so thankful for that. We had a coach come in last year to do some staff coaching over a couple of days for our church. And one of the things they do is they say, hey, what are kind of like your giving ratios and numbers? And we told the guy, he's like, I hate you. He's like, I'm a local church pastor, and you like give double. All you people give double what our people do on a weekly basis. And they're very generous. They're very kind. And so we're blessed for that. And so I look at this and go, man, this is a really awesome opportunity, right? This is a chance for us to just retire the current debt load. Now, we're going to have a phase 2, which means we're going to have to raise more money as we go down the road. But by recovering the debt now, it means we go in and we have no bills, means every month we'll save almost $5,000 a month that we can just snowball in toward the next phase of the project, right? So we're just going to keep rolling that money that way. It's why we, even as a church, choose to run as slim as we choose to do. So we can just keep chucking money that direction because this is something that we want to make as a gift for the city, right? And in that, God's presence and God's glory, hopefully, is going to be felt in our lives. And so, again, this whole thing will, like I said, save about $5,000 a month, set us up for phase 2. establishes a lot of collateral. We're not going to have any bills to pay. At this point, it's going to be great. But it's also an opportunity for all of us. It's an opportunity for all of us because we have this thing that we call FIT, followers in training, right? Because we're built, not born. That's our whole thing. And so some of the principles we have under FIT is this. FIT people care for their neighbors intentionally. This is a way we can do that. We open the hub up to a lot of things, and we'll continue to do that, right? It's a third space for our community. We want it to be a central component to our city. In fact, when this is all done one day, you know what we're going to call it? The hub. We're not going to call it Redemption Church. We're going to call it the hub, right? There's a website that gives like the top terms that you need to know about when you move to Duvall. The hub is on that website. We don't even know who did it. It's just in there as like something to know, the hub. A lot of stuff happens there, right? It was awesome. And we're going to continue to press that, right? So it's that kind of opportunity. It's also another opportunity because FIT people give their money generously. And we talked about that through our FIT series. And so it's an opportunity for that. But it's also an opportunity for the fact that FIT people interact with God daily. And that means we need your prayer. We need your prayer. Through this whole process, we still need a lot of prayer. As much as we might look at this and say, hey, let's just get this thing tackled, we want to make sure our people are praying as we're getting things tackled. If we can bring up that slide with our prayers, we want you to be praying for the logistics with the city because it's just a process, right? You're going through permitting and you're trying to get all the wetland studies done and making sure you're, kind of getting things put in order as it pertains to the environment and all the other things that go into that, working with neighbors and that kind of thing, which is another thing, good relations with our neighbors, other businesses that we have to partner with and things like parking and just doing a project that doesn't irritate them, right? Because we all know what it's like when like 203 is shut down for like 17 years straight and they finally open it and we're like, oh, finally, right? So like we know that we'll have a footprint that will sometimes require things getting closed and we want our neighbors to, again, appreciate our presence because we're loving on them. Also for economical solutions as we move forward, there's all kinds of mysteries when you build. If you've ever built anything, you realize there's mysteries that come to light suddenly and they're usually never your builder says, this is going to be a whole lot less. We had no idea, you know what I mean? Really, just dropped 50%. It's crazy, right? So, So economic solutions, that'd be great, but then also for God to show up big in, through, and among us, right? We're not just doing this because, hey, that's what churches do. We want God to be made much of in the process, right? We want to sense Him. We want Him to be sensed by others. That's the heart, right? And so our spirit, hopefully, is exactly the same as what God was asking of the Israelites and what they revealed. Their heart was generous in it. Their skill set was motivated to it because they were hungry for more of Him in their existence. That's the opportunity we have. And so right now, we're actually going to go into our time of communion, which is great. And I love that we end with unity in Christ. And we reflect on what He's given to us so freely, which is why He says, hey, man, freely you've received, so freely give. So freely give your prayers, freely give everything that God is leading your heart to do. But man, we have an awesome, awesome opportunity right now. And so I'm going to go ahead and pray, get us ready for our time of communion, asking that you would settle your heart and be going to Him in this time and say, all right, Jesus, what is it that you want of me in this time? What is it you're seeking of my life? Jesus, I thank you again for just reminder and opportunity. And sometimes opportunity can be uncomfortable, right? Like we know, like, hey, if I'm going to go to the next level, I have to go to that uncomfortable space, but I'm doing it because chiefly I want you more. I want to celebrate you and enjoy you more and seek you more and reveal you more and be committed to you more. I pray that we don't settle for casual Christian lives. I pray that we don't settle for ease. I pray that we don't just kind of poke around at the edges, but that we will dive in deep, that we will do the hard things because they are the most rewarding and fulfilling things. And so, Jesus, we seek you and we need you, and we thank you that you came into this world, and from that you moved from fabric to flesh. Not only you came in the flesh, but you moved into our very lives, that you now come to dwell among us and in us and through us so that we might reveal you to the world around us. And I pray that we're loyal to that cause. No matter what the cost, I pray that we're loyal to that cause because we want more of you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for even this time of communion where we reflect on your body given, your blood shed. May we receive this in great joy for all that you've done for us. In your good name, amen.